right. This is a video that won't play, it would be too long. So I'm going to go briefly through a project, and it actually works well because Perry asked a question about documentation and indexing in the last presentations. And the work that actually Carol and I are doing separately but together documentation comes very strongly in it, and we try to see we work in that sort of region between where documentation becomes a design project and where you kind of reinvent your subject through representation. I have a few projects, but I'm not going to present them because I'm going to concentrate on this and just to try to unpack the drawings that are in the front. And I'm going to take you on a very brief tour of rest areas in Quebec, in the province of Quebec, which is a fascination of mine. And I'm doing this little detour just so that that we understand that the complexity of times that I'm trying to fold into these drawings. There's going to be a first part which is going to be a tour, and I'm going to skip over some parts. I apologize. And then to get to how the drawings are approached, because they were done. They're my Montreal drawings. They were done in the last few days. So I'm fascinated by the rest area. It has a particular significance in automobility, which is a term I'm borrowing from historian Ben Bradley, which encompasses everything that has to do with building roads and cars, but the oil industry as well, and in Quebec eventually, of course, hydroelectricity. So it's a big complex system. And they're kind of forgotten there, but I'm fascinated by them because they are public, at least the ones I'm presenting today. And my work tends to focus on public architecture, municipal usually, and in this case, provincial installations. And it's a forgotten piece that we usually consume with pressing urgency, stopping along the road. And that doesn't have necessarily a lettre de noblesse, enfin. It's, let's say, yes, it is something easily forgotten or left aside, maybe to the roadside. So what I'm showing right now are images, obviously this is from the 70s, but the project that we're looking at with me and my students is the development of the Quebec Public Rest Area Program, or parks, and their relationship to the territory, and how actually there's a parallel between the way this whole project was developed and the kind of like identity-forming construction of a national identity in Quebec. So it starts in the mid-60s, and there's about 200 that are built over the next 5-10 years, and it's a boom expansion. Of course, tourism. Things are getting ready for Expo 67 here in Montreal, but and Quebec at that time basically builds the longest road network of Canada. I think it may still be the longest meter-wise, and it stretches far over the land. And what's interesting is that it's also tied in, although there's a desire to make it modern and constantly modernize, there's an anti-modern sentiment and this is a term from Maud Emmanuel Lambert, historian. And the anti-modern comes because the identity that's forming at the same time is tied to this, and this is actually a competition result for Canadian homes on the roadside to basically make the architecture that we see on the road look like this, and this is 1944. And then what you have there is a guide that is from, I think this one is from the 60s, from about 67, 65. And you have this image of, yes, Quebec is what's happening on the back, still weaving in non-modern ways while people with cars are visiting them. There's also a sort of blindness to this and to the territory that is kind of with this emerging identity, and I point out the troublesome image on the bottom right, where this expansion of the road network is also tied into this idea that you're accessing a sort of wilderness, and that there's a nature that exists beyond the road that you will be accessing through the road. So there's a sort of myth creation with nature that happens with this massive infrastructure project, paradoxically, so that you can actually feel that you're still in nature, looking at a map of touring a province. This is on Trans-Canada Highway. It's still, it's been demolished, but some are exactly like this. You can look at a map and feel that you're getting somewhere where, you know, you are still just on the road network. I have to show this one, and this is why I'll take my time because it's great. I'm going to skip over telling you it's an other space by Foucault. I'll take that part away because we want to look at those photos. These are great. So this is in 1976. It's a rest stop now demolished, and on the edge of trees mistaken for forest, comforting signs follow one another in a decor that is fabricated from scratch. A child stands watching the forest, rifle in hand, as if a bear were about to suddenly emerge, and guard had to be kept at the edge of the unknown. However, of course, far from taking us to this other reality, the road really can only lead us to itself. So there's a, you know, the road becomes a territory at this point, although whatever we want to believe. And it's a complete constructed reality that is constructed by the Ministry of Transportation. As you can see in these plans, this is the, you'll see them again. But it's the same, if the road constructs its own reality, it's the same thing with rest stops. They are a sort of reality that's fully constructed. And this is why I speak of them as chronotopes, so as places that kind of materialize time and space. And this is where, with my students, this is named the place. So I think those from our friend from overseas, there's a lot from my time in London there. So there's, it's easily recognizable for some, but there's a Turkish one. But there's a certain, exactly, a reality that gets folded into these little pavilions on the side of the road. Right, and they actually make the landscape of the infrastructure and the road network kind of visible. And it's time visible to us right now in the present because they still exist. And in this cultural landscape, like these places have, you know, they're both heterochronic, so they exist in different times, and they're also heterotopic because they are taking us to some sort of elsewhere, even if it's constructed. But it could be the elsewhere of vacation, the weekend, and different temporalities that get also come to rest there. I'm going to skip really quickly through these. This is Ontario versus Quebec, circa 2005. So time is really culturally constructed here in comparison. And this is continuous time because we have the 1965 example leading, no, 1974, sorry, there I have the right title, to its version in 2020, which is the exact same thing, but just updated and normalized. And to this, which is basically one from 65 and one from 2021, and I'll let you decide which one is which, but they're both still standing on the same road. That as well. That's still. Okay, so leading into the drawings, what the project is like, these are all the 300 rest areas. These are all, this is 87 managed by the government, and this is 49 that have that have washrooms. No one's keeping time. I say I'm going to go be fast, but Louise, peux-tu me dire quand... Ah. Ça fait 11 minutes. Merci, super, excellent. Okay. So, and I focused on these, the 49, because they have washrooms, so they kind of bring the body as well to the roadside. I traveled, if you know this, you know how I traveled, and to visit all of these and connect the dots. If you know the geography of Quebec, you can see the province, the bottom half, not even, the bottom fifth of the province appear there. So it stretches quite far. But what it promises is that by visiting all of them and basically doing an inventory of these things, you're fully embracing the fact that the ministry is telling you that this is Quebec. You know, these are the roads, these are the regions, and in those you find rest areas that will, you know, make your trip more enjoyable. And it stretches far. It stretches from, for those who know, Témiscamingue to Uichi Bay James there, the furthest north, And then right in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, it's municipal right now, but it used to be provincial, so I put in there. It's on the Ile de la Madeleine. Ah, yes, it's like, this says drink water. Because otherwise we forget. This is a trip in order. So today the provincial network, as you can see, is comprised of, there's about 6 decades of buildings that are coexist at the same time. And all of sort of issues of bureaucracy and cultural identity, politics, come to rest in these places. Once you start to unpack them, they're actually fascinating because they tell a story. I'll show you a few, okay, yes, those are not the drawings I want to show you, but yes, we draw them like this. And then we have a few here, but for example, the anti-modern thing I talked about, so this is really from the beginning, but it really embraces that 40s, 50s attitude. The 65 national identity construction, this is on the Trans-Canada Highway. It's on the Trans-Canada Highway. And this is the postmodern version, so this is the Maison Canadienne, and this is this postmodern interpretation by the Ministry of Transport, I have to say. Architects are involved, but within. So the 70s and a kind of the start of a sort of marginal area with the security signs coming up. The great devolution of the 80s, neoliberal policies come and basically we re-engineer the spending, the government spending, so that they give them to municipalities like this one. So you recognize the type is still there. This one is from 1984. And it's in a place where we dig up gold. So the wealth is clearly somewhere else. This one is a reinterpretation in 2001 of the same thing you saw earlier. This one starts to look at program. It diversifies. The user becomes really needy. So like tourism is in there, and it's a programmatic version of the thing. And then we let go and we do public-private partnership in 2010, and we have these things popping up. So the public washroom becomes private for the first time, and they fail. So we come back and we do an inverted butterfly roof that has a wink to the old one. But these are popping up now in 2021. They are, sort of the memory is disappearing. And some of them. So these are abandoned ones that are still yet to be demolished, but we can still visit, but they're closed. This is the, okay. 5? Parfait, super, excellent. J'ai pas pu faire 10 minutes, je suis désolé. Okay, so in the drawings we do, there's a part of remembering. Obviously, we do the inventory, and then we start messing up with it through the drawing, through the photograph. And the first idea is, yes, that there's an of preservation through this, because although they are not architecturally phenomenal, they actually are really worth studying, because they say quite a bit about the way we expect the territory to work, or the way we exploit it. So beyond the simple axonometric I showed, what we're trying to express are kind of those chronotopes that are both resting and moving at the same time. And I'm going to jump to the next few quite quickly, but it's just a few principles that we're working with in the drawings. This is not a rest area, but through other projects. One is the dialogic, so we're always, whoops, ça. Excuse-moi, Grégory Richard, ça va tourner bientôt, voilà. So we're trying to basically mesh different realities. Here we're looking at municipal buildings, but pre-COVID and post-COVID and during COVID, and how the different spaces kind of merge into something that is all new. So this is the interior of a municipal building, but with that kind of dialogue between pre and post. So this is always happening in the drawings. And the other thing that we always work with is a kind of remixing, reassembling of the parts. So these are municipal buildings. I don't have photos of them, but they're town halls and such that we break apart in parts, and then we reassemble into new figures like these, into these drawings. Some express the temporal dimension of the places, and they're built as layers, so that basically you can move across elements or like through, and in the third or 2.5, as some colleagues would say. I don't have them here; they're somewhere else in Montreal right now. But these that are on the table, so yes, this was fun. This was last week. So doing cyanotype for those drawings that are in the front. And so what we have, is it animation? No. Oh, the animation didn't work. Ah, yes, it's here. Sorry. So it's really quite simple the way we kind of reassemble here. We're not breaking them apart. This is an outhouse. And it's quite simple. We draw an axonometric, and then we start messing up with the ratio in the axes to basically stretch it, but still have it measurable. So we're trying to kind of create a balance between, because it's a ministry project, so everything is measured, everything is normalized, I'd say, yeah. So what we're trying to do is keep the measure, but find, pleasure into the place. So you have these in the front. So these are laser cut and computer drawn, printed, laser cut, and you can see the result there on the table of individual types, and these, which are super small, but they're in the front, which are we're using the site, not just the building. And what happens when you use the site, it's quite fascinating. So this is a Trans-Canada Highway, and is that the kind of like phased out axo starts to take on the qualities of the road. Actually, this is my conclusion, so I should, yeah. So they start taking on so for example, in this one, the long stretch of the Trans-Canada Highway, it's linear, it's rude to topography, it's taunt, it's faster than anything else. And this one, the meander of the provincial road, it's sinuous, kinder to local topography, it's more slack, and it's definitely much slower as well. So what you see here is one of those little cabanes that basically has been stretched out. But this is the same projections layered in a similar way that will actually, and this was not predicted, but this is the kind of discovery of the drawing at the moment. The way it stands is that, like, all of a sudden it actually, the qualities of the space and time actually comes out right in the drawing. Right, yes, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Bernard, very interesting, very nice. Just a quick question. Given the way that, I mean, you set out in a very interesting way the kind of representational agenda of the ministry projects, and I was wondering if, having sort of been through this process, if you're now tempted to rewrite what the ministry might be, that in other words, to reread the transformation back into the political institution.
That sounds like a wonderful project, a worthwhile battle, perhaps. But what's interesting is that they started to, in 2003. What they did is that they took out the space where the rest area is out of the highway corridor, so that they could get away from their own norms. Otherwise, and this is a time where architects from the outside were brought in, but the first thing was to take out the thing from the ministry, because the ministry realized that, like, basically they were tied into their own norms. So they create new ones for the roadside, but they're still created by the ministry. So there's a sort of, anyways. But yes, I think the point here would eventually be to come back to, they are supporting the project, so I would, not financially. They let me sleep there. That's the, no, exactly. No, but I think the idea of norm is really coming out, and definitely this is something, yeah, absolutely, not yet, to come, yeah. Alberto.
Did you ever think that it might be interesting to try to differentiate? Because the problem with these things is that they become typologies and they get reproduced like everywhere. And the province has very different territories and very different landscapes. Yeah. And so the challenge would be, for me, I mean, honestly, would be to do something that would have more to do with the landscape and particularities of the different rest stops, rather than the stuff that I particularly don't like. I mean, I don't know how you get fascinated by something like that.
Oh, oh yeah, but fascination does not mean love. That's the, it's so it's quite the, but no, but I think it's a good point because of the presentation today and the type of, there's, some of the better ones are the ones that obviously where you're discovering a landscape that they've manufactured, but that still is something different where you can, you know, there's one on the North Coast that's actually beautiful because you're on the beach. It's absolutely gorgeous. So like there are moments like this, and also just so that landscape-wise, absolutely is part, and architectural-wise, the types when you that thing that the animation of all the stops is that when you put them in order of traveling, you see the same model appear in region. So there were like, you know, there's a Lac Saint-Jean model that was repeated, and there's one in Abitibi-Témiscamingue that was repeated as well. So there's even within that very narrow frame, there's a little locality. I think we have to move on.
Oh, there is a question online, I think.
Ah,
All right.
Si c'est Carole, ça va.
From Carol. So when do the drawings begin to form in your project, in your head? And do you need all the documentation to be done and then you draw, or do you begin to think of your drawings as you document?
Merci Carole, c'est une bonne question. The drawings start the drawings started before we did the trip to photograph all of them. So the kind of documentation part of drawing, so the axos, the really regular axonometric that you saw, were all produced a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and then it's that material that we use then to let's say accelerate the drawings into these things which are responding to the trip. So their documentation happens in drawing before and after, so it's kind of a continuous process to have something to work with, not just photography or documents, but really have whether it's an axonometric of a municipal building or an outhouse, but something to start with. J'espère que ça répond à ta question. Thank you very much. And now,